Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I am your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Internet Anon Lomez. Lomez is a Twitter personality who began Passage Publishing, which is a very ambitious publishing project that is concentrating on bringing to light voices that are otherwise shunned by the mainstream publishing industry. They just recently published their first Passage Prize, and there was only 2 runs on that, one hardcover and one softcover, and I have the softcover as one of the few to get access to this. Now they're sold out, and he swears that he's not going to publish any more to create a artifact that is nested in the real world as opposed to the digital world. And what this is an incredibly beautiful volume filled with prose and fiction and poetry and artwork. And a lot of the stories and the ideas that are contained in this volume are dissident or outside the mainstream voices, and a lot of it is anon. He granted me an interview to speak about this particular project, his politics, and what we can be doing on the cultural side of the so-called culture war that is not necessarily engaged in a politic that is, about voting or about holding the correct opinions or holding the right positions of power, but actually generating content that opens up new passageways to a better future and hopefully a better present. This guy is a phenomenal man. I hope to have him on again, and I hope that he does more interviews like this because his spirit and his personality is just great to hang out with. And so, without further ado, here is Lomez.
Okay, we're in. Let's go.
Blessed. Let's go. Lomez, what was your first job?
My first job, washing cars.
Oh.
My first real job, though, where I was just getting paid like cash from neighbors, was at a movie store. Okay, a rental movie store, and this was a major formative moment for me. Spending time in this movie store when I was 16 with some sort of like seedy movie store type characters who were a little older. They were in like junior college or the like alternative high school. And they would have like complicated ways of like smoking different kinds of drugs, and they would steal money from the guy who owned the movie store. And they were like in alt bands and stuff, like these very cool, sort of interesting older people. This was my first entree into sort of adult life, like
how old were you? 16?
I was like 16. I was 16. Yeah, I worked at home.
Not a
movie
Blockbuster.
Store. No, this was a local. Yeah, it wasn't even a chain. It was the only one of its kind.
Pre-chain days. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was like. I'm dating just by virtue of working at a movie store, you could probably guess what age I am. But like this guy who worked at the pizza store across the mall would come by, and he was dating this girl I worked with, and he knew how to use the splicer, and he would take like bits of film from like the porn cassettes, and he would splice them like into the Little Mermaid and stuff.
Oh, wait, are you serious?
Yeah, totally.
So did you talk to Chuck Palahniuk about 15, 18 years ago? Give him this idea?
No, but I suspect that maybe this guy had like read this, maybe, or had seen this somewhere.
Yeah. Oh my God.
But he certainly wasn't clever enough to have come up with this on his own.
Okay.
So it's like, almost certain that he got this idea from somewhere else. Huh. Although it surprised me to learn that he'd read it in a book. I'm not sure this guy was entirely literate, so there's a lot of pieces missing from the story.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you work there just because it was convenient, or did you have a particular love of movies? Did you develop a love of film there? Doing that?
Yeah, I liked movies, but it was also a matter of convenience. I could ride my bike to this place. So I was trying to save up money to buy a car.
Oh, okay.
Classic 16-year-old high school story. I needed like $1,000, I think, was the total I was trying to raise. in time to like get a car. And I got the money. It took me, after like football season ended, probably 3 to 6 months of working weekends to get the car. But then I liked it. I actually liked working there, so I stayed there and worked there for a couple years, like on and off. That was like my high school job.
Okay. Yeah. And was the car for the girls? What was the car for?
I mean, you're 16,
Well, explain that, because the 16-year-olds nowadays have no idea why.
A car represents so much when you're that age, or did. Maybe this is different now, but a car represented freedom. This was the sort of formal break from the world that was circumscribed by your parents. And you could now break out of these boundaries into the rest of the universe. I mean, that's what it felt like. The car gave you access to the universe. And even if it only meant like driving an hour and a half to get to the big city, it had the effect on 16-year-old me anyway, of accessing entirely alien and sort of foreign places, it was a representation of worldliness or the ability to escape. And then there were it did have this benefit that you could bring people with you. And certainly being able to like take a girl somewhere was a major part of the appeal. But also, if you didn't have a car, it was less having the car that mattered than the fact that you didn't have a car meant that you were still in the grip of childhood. And therefore, from the point of view of a girl, a potential partner, that was, a deal breaker.
Yeah.
They would never date a
non-starter,
guy
maybe.
Yeah. I mean, they would never. I can't imagine them dating a guy who didn't have a car. I guess that's changed now. I've talked to a few friends who have kids who are like high school age, and I've heard that kids are no longer quite as obsessed with getting cars.
Yeah. No. It's
Do you know this for sure? Or is this
it's definitely a stat that I've encountered. I mean, the difference between me and my brother, which is 9 years, was that, one of the main differences, I was born in 76, he was born in 85, was that he was in no rush to get a car. That was all I could think about. It was like getting my license and getting to drive, especially because I had a paper route. That was my first job. And so having access to the family van to do the paper route, especially on Sundays, was like a big drive for me.
It's monumental. It also represents like sexuality, like coming into adulthood cannot be disaggregated from sexuality and becoming like a sexual person. There's a great short story by Tom Perrotta about this very thing called Bad. It's in the his collection of stories called Bad Haircut. And it might even be the titular story, actually, now that I think about it. And it's this interwoven narrative about this 16-year-old character's getting his license and his first car and then losing his virginity. And the kind of danger and risk that is inherent to both of these things, and how they're both, like we've been saying, this representation of an escape from childhood, the constraints of childhood. Yeah. It's a great story. It's a great collection. Tom Perrotta is a great writer. I'd encourage people to read that.
I'm thinking of the trope of the sports car in middle age, and how that might be a throwback to the sexual activation that you get for certain generations, the boomers and Gen X, we got our first car when we, got our first lay right around there. Those things are mixed together. And so when it comes about in middle age, we want to relive that by getting reinvesting ourselves in the car and the girlfriend.
Yes.
And I wonder if if millennials are going to get a new gaming rig when they're 52 or some shit.
Right. The new gaming chair. Yeah, right. When they file their divorce papers, they go straight to the Best Buy and buy a new gaming chair. Yeah. That's very sad. That's a bleak thought. I mean, this idea that the middle age, it's a very cliche thing. I'm not sure how actually true this is for people who are actually going through a kind of midlife crisis. But of course, the cliche is you go buy a Porsche or something, and it's happening all around the same time that your kids are getting a little older. Maybe your wife now is postmenopausal. Okay, so you're on the other side of this hill, and now you're reaching for this nostalgia and the car as a representation of this sort of ultimate desire you had as a young man now being fulfilled at the kind of peak of your life. That's an interesting idea. I've never thought of that, but I think there's probably something to that. And I think you're right, actually, that's probably a time-constrained sort of cycle that may not exist anymore.
Well, okay, so not to get political, but and I don't really know your politics entirely, but I'm assuming you're kind of on the dissident, kind of not left or anti establishment thing. And one of the critiques within the right-wing dissident neo-reactionary, not to peg you at all, but one of the problems that they have is are we just reenacting some sort of nostalgic grab for power? Are we kind of being boomery in our middle age where we're not in power anymore? These ideas that held sway over our imaginations, we want to reboot them in some way. Is there some sort of echo of that grasping for power?
Maybe. I don't quite see it that way. I mean, there are people who, within our broad sphere, so let me say this. Sometimes you hear people who are dissidents or are heretical of the sort of status quo, sort of prevailing moral wisdom and political wisdom of our age, the consensus view, who really just want to press a reset button and go back to 1996 or something.
Yeah.
This is something, though, I actually hear more often from people who would describe themselves as quote unquote liberals or classical liberals. They tend to be a little older. They're older than I am. And I think it's a bit reductive to accuse them of simply reaching for nostalgia, reaching back to a period in which they were ascendant, although that may be part of it. I think they genuinely just were very comfortable with the prevailing norms of this end of history period. And they really think that's the best way to sort of run a society, and it's optimal for flourishing for all different kinds of people, and it satisfies this sort of endpoint of American ascendancy, I think, for them. I'm sort of agnostic on that. My position is that, we can't go back. There's no reset button. So wishing for this or having your politics oriented towards the idea that we might possibly push that button and go back is very foolish. There's nothing there. George Bush famously said, the past is over. We can't go back. Okay. And there's wisdom in that. And this is, I have a sort of critique about not reactionary politics per se, but this persistent idea that we just simply want to return. There may be things that we want to recapture, certain ways of thinking and orienting ourselves and organizing ourselves as communities, and how we receive information certainly is a big point for me, and where we look to for these nodes of authority that we grant sort of epistemic supremacy toward. I think we've strayed, and that there is wisdom in trying to recapture old ways of doing things. But I'm not one who just wants to return to pick your date, because it's simply not possible.
Yeah, yeah.
The only way out is through. The only direction we can go is forward, and it's going to require carving out new ways of being, thinking, organizing, etc.
You said a phrase there that could be interpreted in two ways, which is the kind of phrase that I like the most myself. How we receive information. Were you talking about like through the channels of information we're organized, or the amount of cynicism, or like how we interpreted the information? Like how we digested and received it.
All of the above.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to couch everything I'm saying by first just saying I'm riffing here. So again, like a lot of this is going to be crude. I don't mean to be precise with this. What I mean is there's a certain epistemic monopoly that very few institutions hold. We might call this the Cathedral. And they transmit a set of messages that we might have previously been able to disintermediate with local authorities of information. So people who take this sort of transmission from the Cathedral, it gets filtered through like sort of regional or local mechanisms and then fed into a general population in such a way that is germane to these regional differences that might have once existed. And so what I think has happened maybe is that those disintermediation nodes have like disappeared. We're all just getting our information straight from the hose that's coming out of the Cathedral. And
yeah, well, I mean, it depends on what phenomena we're talking about. So January 6th would be different than Charlottesville, which would be different than Evergreen. So the Evergreen State College, let's put it on a continuum. Evergreen State College, massive amounts of individual upload videos straight onto the internet. Charlottesville, probably a little bit more mediated. Probably, I don't know the cache of online selfie videos of that. I don't think streaming was necessarily, well, it happened right after Evergreen. And then January 6th, where the principal footage was probably taken from people's phones or gotten through the security cameras, right? So you have a highly cathedralized the data all has to go through the Cathedral with January 6th, whereas opposed to the Evergreen State College, it kind of is just kind of out there. So for phenomena where the phenomena is just kind of out there, we get like, or even something non-political like the Beirut explosion a few years ago, where you just had all these selfies where people could collect all that data and put together into like a one company did a brilliant breakdown of that explosion by taking all of those video angles and like making a whole model out of it. That gives us things are more direct when they're not centralized. So the Cathedral can't control everything. So there is like, I just want to complicate things. There's different kinds of phenomena.
So I think maybe we're talking about different layers of information. So we have on the one hand, just the question of what happened in any given event. And I think that is actually disintermediated by, whatever you want to call it, citizen journalism, or just the proliferation of cameras and phones and whatever else that like, in, Twitter or whatever, there's people on the ground, like taking photographs and videos of these events. And you're going to receive a very different picture of events depending on what information community you're a part of. Yeah. And so, yes, that's very like sort of regional and local. And I think that fits my definition of how information is kind of split up and filtered. What I'm thinking of is less the what happened than these larger sort of narrative and even moral interpretations that then get grafted onto these events, and it almost doesn't matter what actually happened. Like the specifics of what happened in these events is secondary to the narrative and the moral implications that arise out of these events at some point after they happen. There's some kind of like consensus mechanism that takes over, where these events, or even it doesn't have to be events. So I'm less even thinking about event driven pieces of information than I am like different kinds of cultural trends. And I'm thinking specifically right now, and I'm sure I could come up with another example, but this is just very salient, is like trans stuff and how that is delivered, or like LGBTQ stuff, how that's delivered to like public school students across the country. There's very little like sort of regional variation. There's a small monopoly over education, higher education credentialing, education schools, the teachers, the people who build curriculums, the principals, the administration, et cetera. They all are getting their cues from essentially the exact same place, from the exact same set of values, in order to, and I don't think this is conscious. I don't mean to make this sound like a conspiracy theory, but it does have the effect of promoting a very, very narrow sort of narrative arc to what education in this case is meant to accomplish, and what kinds of students and citizens we're trying to produce through a public education system. There isn't any of this filtering mechanism.
Okay. So there are certain layers of present society that have been homogenized on a near global or at least national level.
Yeah.
And when we reference the cathedral does have hegemony over certain things. Sex ed would be probably very obvious.
I mean, the cathedral cannot determine what happens. And so what I mean is like events will just take place, okay? That are outside the control of the cathedral. There will be some like exogenous event. I mean, maybe you might say like the cathedral could be involved in some tenuous way, but even like with the pandemic or something, even if you think this is like a lab leak and it was the NIH that was funding this, it's not like an intentional pandemic caused by the cathedral. Okay. Yeah. Or I don't know. I don't think that's likely.
You could make the case that it could, but it was such a huge thing. And then their reaction to it was all over the place that it's like, well, they probably didn't know what was going on. So.
Yeah, well, they're not. I just don't think they're competent enough to pull something like that off.
God save us!
They wouldn't.
They're just
not
rulers.
They're not smart enough or clever enough to do that. That's my belief. But what I would say, what the cathedral does do then is we have this event. There's a lot of confusion and uncertainty about how to interpret this and what do we do about it and what are the implications of this and how does this sort of reframe like consensus around public health and all sorts of these tricky things. And what the cathedral does is then set that narrative. And they are very disciplined. And they have a way of self-policing and disciplining each other so that there is a clear and singular and coherent message and way of interpreting
at any given
events.
Time, yes, but over time, no. Right. So that's
over
the
time,
weakness.
no. Well, but what's amazing is their position on this will change, but they will all sort of simultaneously, as if they're colluding. I don't think they are. The incentive structures are just such that the kind of appearance of collusion is predetermined, okay, by these incentives, and they all just can pretend together as if this is a coherent narrative. All even as their minds change about sort of masks or whatever. Vaxes are suddenly not about keeping you from getting the disease. They're now about preventing, these bad cases of COVID, morbid cases of COVID. And this way of seamlessly sort of changing the interpretation and transmitting a coherent message is actually fairly remarkable.
I don't think I have to argue. I'm nitpicking, but it's not a coherent message. It's a consensus. It's not coherence because it doesn't add up over time. It's just it's like a snap consensus. It's a continual consensus.
No, I think that's right. You're right. The word coherent there is wrong to describe the narrative. Just over
time. But I mean, there's consistent, but yeah. But so I wanted to interject about the mask thing because now you have the mayor of New York who was he was bloviating about how toddlers need to wear masks, and now he's saying that you shouldn't let anybody into your business who's wearing a mask because they might be able to kill you, right? So the whole narrative about the morbidity relationship between morbidity and mask, you made me think of a kind of a triple kind of metaphor between the incentive structure that builds the people who work in, let's say, media or the information apparatus. So there's an incentive structure, and then there's this Pavlovian kind of almost response level to it. That's kind of even like the incentive structure is already built in on a Pavlovian level. And then there's like this weird way that a school of fish kind of just all swim together, which is not even Pavlovian. It's some sort of, it's like they're almost connected. I don't know the science behind it, but they're connected by some sort of force field, some sort of magnetic thing that ties them together. So there's like a lower level, which you could use metaphorical spiritual language to say that these people are kind of acting in the spirit of something greater than them. They're acting out the spirit of the age, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the cathedral, the beast that they're operating on. Through incentive structures gets them in the door. Pavlovian structures kind of start to tune them into that, and then they just become a part of the beast.
Yeah, I think these institutions take on some kind of intentionality in their selection mechanisms. So it's a matter of personnel, and I think these institutions have become really efficient at selecting precisely the kind of people who will most effortlessly conform to the directives that are most optimal for the continuing survival of those institutions. And there's a certain feedback loop where over time, so what happened, I mean, again, sorry, I'm riffing here. But
no, this is fun. We're just having fun.
So what I think happens is, in order to build these institutions initially, you need people who are sort of risk takers and iconoclasts, because you're taking a chance on something big, and building out a successful institution requires a level of risk taking and eccentricity, and the kind of tension of people who are disagreeing with each other, and the sorts of positive outcomes that arise from healthy disagreement. And so this process creates successful and robust institutions, but once they reach a certain level of success and
too big to fail level,
then they cease. It becomes actually a net negative to include in the corpus of personnel those kinds of iconoclasts, eccentrics, risk takers, etc., who are going to rock the boat and challenge things, and potentially through sort of rash action, maybe put the whole thing in jeopardy. So you want to remove those people from the institution, and over time, those people are entirely removed, and you're left with what amount to sort of court mandarins who are just sort
running
of
a script.
The machine is
NPCs.
on autopilot. Yes. and they're going to go down the road. They're going to keep the machine moving straight, but they're not going to ever be able to course correct. And they might run off a cliff, or they might just run out into the desert and just keep going. And it can go for a very long time. I mean, if the institution is big enough and there's enough inertia behind it, and there's enough fuel feeding this thing, whether it's massive endowments or just a lack of an alternative to sort of arise in its place, these things can function ineffectively and poorly for a very, very long time.
Wow. This is like, you're making me think. I have to just pause for a brief moment and plug your Passage Prize, the first, the book. What do you call it? Like you guys had a Passage Prize. We should talk about it. But you guys produced a volume of creative and nonfiction, creative fiction, nonfiction poetry, and art that is just phenomenal. I think you guys have sold out. Maybe you'll do another print run, but it's phenomenal. So I've been ingesting that, and so listening to you now, just thinking about this huge kind of city on wheels that's just kind of spinning itself out into the desert. It's a beautiful image. I'm sure some science fiction writers capitalize on that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'll try to sort of pivot. Maybe we can come back to this previous point. But so Passage Prize, So I mean, okay, you could probably surmise from my sort of cynicism about our institutions and where they're headed and how they're currently being run that I'm dissatisfied with them. And this applies as much to sort of like journalism or governance as it does to culture and art. And I like culture and art. That's the thing that animates me. And so I wanted to maybe try to figure out a modest way to, if I couldn't, I don't think there's much sense in trying to like recapture these machines that are running on autopilot. I think they're just going to have to expend themselves. What we want to maybe try to do is start alternative or parallel sort of ecosystems, cultures, institutions, whatever you want to call it. My very modest
parallel Paris Review.
Maybe. I mean, even that may be too grandiose. I was not even thinking of it in those terms. I just wanted, here, I have this view about the world and about culture. What can I do about this? Well, one thing I can do about it is maybe I'll put up $10,000 and invite people to send me art, that's like interesting or iconoclastic or just defies in some way. And this is very easy to do. It's never been easier to be a dissident. Defies in some way like the status quo, what is expected from artists, writers, in sort of mainstream culture. So I'll hand out $10,000 and this will be some bait that I'll use to try to get some talented people to send me stuff. And I didn't even know what I was going to do with it. It turned out I got enough stuff. I got about 2,000 submissions for this project.
Wow.
Ended up raising like $20,000 to give out as a prize. I decided, I'm going to make a book out of this. I'm going to take the very best stuff I was given, or at least the most interesting stuff I was given. I had some amazing judges help me out who read like Zero H.P. Lovecraft read through over 1 million words of short stories. It's insane how much work these judges put into this. So I owe them a ton of credit. And so we put a book together, and my idea was to sell the book in order to finance the next Passage Prize. And so I took it was maybe stupid, but I said, I'm going to sell this thing for $400, see if I can sell out 250 of them. That'll make me like $100,000 gross, but it cost me over $200 per book to print. So it's insane. Well, so there's like gold inlay, and they have like these marbled end papers that we imported from France, these very nice hand marbled end papers that were like $15 a sheet.
Goodness.
It was just totally crazy. We got silk, this really fine silk paper, because we wanted it to be really good. And I was sort of shocked, but no, we sold out of that initial print run, and then I printed 250 more paperback versions, which were like $75.
Yeah.
And we just recently sold out of those. So this is all going to allow us to run the next version of Passage Prize, and then also financing a couple other books that I want to produce. Whether it matters to listeners or not, I still haven't paid myself a penny from any of these, receipts on this. It's all going towards, more of this stuff. I just want to make more of this stuff and more of this stuff and more of this stuff.
Yeah.
And it appears there's an audience for it. I think I'm not alone in my dissatisfaction with the status quo. And so even if what we're producing at the moment is not like transcendent or like the greatest writing anyone's ever seen, I think it's quite good. In some cases, very, very good. What we're doing is providing this space, this opportunity, a kind of landscape where these flowers might bloom. Okay, it's arid soil. Or not arid soil, sorry. It's fertile soil, I meant to say.
You have to aerate the fertile soil, though. But
there you go. Yeah, we can do that next.
Just on a physical level, it's an artifact. Like the copy that I got, and I would highly suggest you do another run if it's possible. The artifact, as an artifact at the time, there's something about it, the tactile feel of it, the words on the page, the people that have met on this in this physical space that you've put together, produced. There's something very special about it that's worth an egregious amount of money for just a book, right? We're not used to paying for that, but hearing the structure you have behind it, I think makes it even more important as a thing. But so going back to our previous discussion, what is the? Because I've spoken with, I've spoken about, the woke. I've done the anti-woke thing. I've done a lot of investigations in my own way about kind of the end of empire and trying to figure out where we are right now as a society. And one thing that I keep on going back to myself is taste. Like we can do all the arguments we want for all these different things, but people don't listen to arguments. They listen to taste. And so I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts? This is a very general question. Hopefully you can make it specific. What are your thoughts on taste making and the importance of taste making in the so-called culture war, even if it is a culture war when we're talking about taste anymore, if that even changes the field?
I think you're exactly right. I do think it's a question of taste. And by taste, I think how I interpret that in this particular context is a question of aesthetics, which is a vague term. There isn't, I don't have a handy definition of that for you. And I certainly, my own sort of aesthetic preferences are not totally relevant here, I don't think. What I think matters here is that, yes, it's going to be quote unquote poets, it's going to be artists that sort of light the path forward. What remains to be seen is the form and style and sort of the disposition that those poets will sort of adopt in order to do that. The truth is, I don't know. Yeah. And what is exciting to me about like Passage Prize and what we're doing is, I think, so we've reached this cul-de-sac. We're at this dead end culturally, I think. I think everybody sort of intuits this on some level. We're stuck. It feels sort of rotted out and hollow and sclerotic. Use whatever term you want. And everybody is kind of looking for what's next. Like, how do we break out of this? How do we break through this? And I'm suspicious of anyone who thinks they have an answer. Because I think if we knew the precise way that we could do it, we would already be doing it. It would already be done. I think what we want to allow ourselves is room for a lot of different voices, sort of heretical voices, eccentric voices, voices that are not allowed at present in the quote unquote Overton window. Yeah. And it's precisely their outsider status and their unwillingness to conform to these present and prevailing norms that will make them capable of finding that special thing, that something that might break us out of this sort of death spiral that we're in. And so I have a very explicit intention of identifying those people and trying to find among those people who might have this voice or style or some kind of creative or artistic impulse that will sort of break out of what we're in and invite us into some new terrain.
There's I don't think it's going to be a style. I think that what you said that's most important that I want to highlight is disposition. It's the articulation of any given style that we're looking for. We are in an artistic or stylistic postmodern landscape. We're dealing with meta styles now. We're not Baroque. We're not I don't know, neoclassical or whatever, modernist or anything. We are postmodernist. We are stylistically postmodernist. And so anybody who is able to master any given form will be bringing in a disposition. We're going to be reading into or noticing the way that they're taking on any given form. We're not looking for any given form. We're looking for somebody who can animate and can breathe life into a form.
Yes. And I think it's, it's going to be too like a positive vision. I think one that is, so I think part of the problem now is, and like our art and culture reflects this, is so much of it is sort of demoralizing. And what I think people are yearning for is some kind of positive human vision of the future that can somehow reconcile this sort of digital hellscape that many fear is bearing down on us.
Yeah.
Where we're all sort of subjected to the pod and we strap on our VR goggles and just disappear into a sort of digital simulacra of our own that just, feeds on our like basest and crudest hedonism. So avoiding that on the one hand, forget like paperclip maximizers for a minute. Like that's the real horror for me is, life extension technologies combined with, this infinite digital simulacra. And what I think people want then is, okay, but nonetheless, also there's like the Kaczynski, John Zerzan, we just blow the whole thing up and return to like, pre-literate, like cave times, maybe. Okay, I'm not completely opposed to that, but it's gonna take some persuasion.
Well, yeah, but you don't want to rob your kids of the SENS emulator, right?
I suppose that's true. So okay, but then we're gonna be living in like a digital world. Okay, that's just what it is. Well, how do we reconcile that with living like fully human lives, positive human lives, human lives that are that sort of seek to, like our higher nature and sort of tactile sensation and being together and sort of smelling each other, like.
I think it was, I'm thinking of, or I'm picturing William Blake and his progenitor, not his progenitor, but the guy that he riffed on a lot, Swedenborg. So there's this this Renaissance man up in Sweden, probably in like the 17th, 18th century. And he was a polymath, incredibly intelligent, the Swedenborg guy. And he starts to try to find where the human soul is in the body. So he starts to dissect all these bodies, trying to find the the place where the spirit and the body connect, and he doesn't find it, but one day an angel like appears to him and says, you're really curious and you're a good enough guy, so I'm going to show you heaven and hell. And Swedenborg writes this book. It's called Heaven and Hell. It's absolutely, it's totally tripped out, where he goes through, this angel takes him through heaven and takes him through hell. And it's very weird, but it's profoundly psychological text, because it talks about the psychology of being in hell, of people who, like the spirits in hell, they'd feel toward the light as the people in heaven feel toward shit, right? So the people in heaven smell shit and they back away from it, and people in hell smell light and they back away from it. And I'm thinking of, the problem that I'm having with Twitter right now is that I see all these people just living in hell, feeding on outrage, I guess is one of the words, but they're just feeding on this cycle of being right and denouncing what's wrong. And no matter what we create, no matter what system we create, there will always be a massive amount of people that want to be in hell. They want to be feeding on those basis instincts. So we can only ever make guidelines or crumb trails towards this better place, but to try to reform the world in a way that assumes that some people don't want to be in hell, or that some types of smelling each other isn't a form of hell. And I think we can, probably evoke certain forms of smelling each other that's actually a form of hell, even though it's really pleasurable. We can't get away from that. Is a part of the human experience. That's what I'm saying. It's a part of the soul of mankind, right? That some souls want to be down there, but adapting to the present media landscape, adapting to the present way that we are communicating with each other and forming society that still allows for some sort of good place within that or through that would be the goal. Not just saying that technology is the problem. Technology is not the problem. Technology is only ever a reflection of our own desires, our own nature.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think it's possible that there comes a point where technology is more than that, where technology is self-directed in a way that sort of breaks from this idea that it's merely a reflection of our desires. I think technology could at some point, and maybe soon, sort of have its own desires and directives. I mean, we don't need to get into the sort of AGI discussion now, but one thing I do want to respond to that. I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not trying to create like a utopia. I don't have this utopian vision where all souls can be saved or something, or where here on Earth we can prevent people from indulging in really bad behaviors that have really bad consequences for themselves and the people near them. What I think is super important, though, is that we somehow erect an alternative to what I see as a possible outcome of the next, let's say, 10, 20 years, which is these technologies become so easily accessible, so efficient, so good at triggering, our endorphins and manipulating our psychology, basically hacking into our wetware, in a way that it makes it impossible for even the most sort of conscientious of us to avoid. I think this has happened to some degree with like recommendation algorithms or even TikTok. This is a very crude version where it's basically hacked into people's psychology. You're fixated on the screen. You don't even realize what's happening. I mean, you can see this with kids. Once you have kids, it becomes very apparent how technologies can do this, YouTube algorithms, etc. None of us are immune to the most efficient and sophisticated versions of this. And so what I want to avoid is a scenario in which we all get taken in and seduced by the technology in that way. and what that's going to require, as far as I'm concerned, is some alternative way of like sort of organizing and understanding your life. Maybe this is just ultimately a religious dimension. Okay, it's just re-centering on the church or whatever. Is there a secular version of this, or a version of this that doesn't have to be a sort of strict religious orthodoxy? Maybe the answer is no, actually. Maybe a sort of strict faith-based life is the way out and the only way out. I don't know.
Yeah.
But we should start exploring this.
Well, okay, so I think that a strict religious way of life is the same thing that you're talking about. Like you're going from, the hot tub to the boiling pot, right?
Well, it's only the same if you are secular yourself. I mean, of course, anybody who has like religious faith would deny that there's any equivalence at all.
Well, I mean, what's the difference between living a life directed by algorithms as opposed to living life directed by religious algorithms, right?
Well, I mean,
I guess it depends on the algorithms,
okay?
Right? Well, I'm just saying the complete abdication of self-agency to an external system is not ideal unless that system is relational and real.
I mean, this idea that God and religion is just a very sophisticated algorithm that is able to direct people and communities of people toward healthy and productive lives may have some merit. I mean, there may be something very sort of true there, but I think I would be inclined to say that is a healthier way of being, or I would guess that that's a healthier way of being. If you're not going to accept strictly that it's better because it's being directed by God, which you believe in to be the source of truth and goodness, okay, and holiness, and that this is your pathway to heaven, for example. If you're not willing to accept that, okay, fine. As a sort of materialistic or secular matter, you might say we might preference that because we know it works. We have thousands of years of history of this particular algorithm working pretty well, and in fact bringing us to the point we're at now. Maybe that's not persuasive. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just trying to. We're playing tonight, right? So we're just throwing out ideas. So I'm just thinking, what you're doing isn't an act of orthodoxy. What you're doing is an act of exploration and curation of explorers, right? So maybe what we lost and what we're longing for is that exploratory dimension, and then the curiosity and the curatorial prowess to follow those lines, bring them together and bring them back to people, right? Maybe that's kind of something, and I'm feeling a little nostalgic, that is the lifeblood, and maybe that creative impulse is more divine than we want to give it credit for, because it's a very problematic sort of divinity, that inventor, that creative spark, that explorer, that person who is the dissident, who wants to break down the ruling orthodoxy. So it's just we're between a rock and a hard place with the whole why leaving the woke religion and then pining for a better orthodoxy, when the only people who are doing this are people who are unorthodox in our very bones. We're just not orthodox, even though myself, I believe in a lot of the religious stuff, but I believe that it can only come to me and to other people from the inside out. It can't be imposed.
Yeah.
But at the same time, some sort of imposition has to happen, or else we're totally screwed.
I have to confess that I'm sort of I'm swimming in the deep end a little bit here. Like I'm a little bit outside of my comfort zone with this conversation. These aren't questions, frankly, I've given a ton of thought to, or not in this particular way. Okay,
Yeah.
so, but yeah, this question of there's an essay or a series of letters that Ernst Younger wrote, a correspondence with Heidegger, about very similar questions. This conflict between sort of modernity and technology and the human soul and what happens from here. And now they're operating in a very different context, in the quote unquote age of anxiety on the eve of World War II, et cetera.
Okay. Yeah.
But Younger, who I take great inspiration from, and in fact, the name Passage comes from Ernst Younger's Forest Passage. This correspondence, I think the German translation, the English translation, pardon, is across the line or over the line. And Younger's answer to this is similar to, I guess, what I'm saying in some sense, which is the way out is through a kind of poetics, is through poetry and poets. And that's just his shorthand for sort of creatives.
Yeah.
But it's also for him, this intersection of poetics and Christianity and Christ. And he sees religion and poetics as inseparable, that they can't be disaggregated, and that that's the mechanism by which we sort of triumph over the potential for these sort of technological horrors that might
Okay. Yeah.
sort of break our ability to control them, that sort of may become more powerful than our ability to control them. This is a very crude summary of his argument.
Yeah.
And this back and forth with him and Heidegger goes much deeper into this. And I would try to recapitulate it here if I understood it better, but I frankly don't. It's very complex stuff. But that's
just speaking from your spirit or to the spirit. Like what is that North Star, that impulse that would be referred to by Christianity? What is the essence of that? What's the direction of that? Do you have a sense of that? And if you do, you don't, and you can't put it into words, you can go ahead and say you can't put it into words. But
I don't know that I could. Something about redemption, I would say, human redemption, possibly. But I know I couldn't, and I wouldn't feel comfortable on the spot here providing a coherent answer to that, because the truth is that these questions sort of like haunt me a little bit. I don't have good answers to this stuff. Yeah. Like I don't.
Well, what draws you to them then? Why would you not ignore them?
Well, because they're important. They're incredibly important. Okay. I mean, I think a life that avoids questions of these kinds, having a spiritual understanding, or sort of your relationship with God or whatever, even if you've come to the conclusion that you don't believe it, well, that should entail quite a bit of introspection and sort of struggle. I mean, I think the burden of proof is on you to reject these things. I guess people might disagree with that. And so I take very seriously these questions, and I'm drawn to them. And I think they're elemental to art and creation. What is creation? What is art? And I don't think we can separate out these questions. And frankly, people much smarter and more interesting than me have given a great deal of thought to it. So the least I could do is just, read what they've had to say about it.
Yeah. Well, and you're not just reading, though. You're curating. How did you find yourself in the position to do this? What got you to this point? I mean, I became a curator at some point myself because I had to be humbled. Yeah. What was your path to curation, to being the producer rather than the prima donna?
I mean, I had some opportunities to write and do stuff in my normie life, and they were, I don't know, not insignificant, but certainly wasn't anything like monumental. And I had close friends that were extremely talented who I saw not getting what in my mind was a fair hearing from whatever you want to call it, the mainstream culture, for a variety of different reasons, having to do with who they were. Maybe they were white, maybe they were men, maybe they were straight, maybe they wrote about topics in a particular way that was not satisfactory to the interests and needs of their editors or agents or whatever else. Nonetheless, these were very talented people, and their work deserved to be out there somewhere. And I thought, well, what might I be able to do to steward that into the world? That was an initial impulse for this. And I don't know, I guess I just have like a native humility about these things. I want other people to succeed. I feel like when, on Twitter and stuff, I'm surrounded by very talented people, and I wanted to see their work get out there and have people read it. And it's really as simple as that, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to dox you. I think we've referenced you're a family man. Is it okay to say that on the record?
Yeah, that's
family?
Okay to say. I am
so
a family.
What's the relationship? So you have this critique, and maybe you can explain what the Longhouse is, right? But without the input and the deep respect of the female partner in a relationship, you're not going to really have a good family. So I want to hear your Longhouse idea, because it's very salient in our current culture, but also see the nuance in it, because you actually live as a family man, as a productive family man.
Yeah, I think, so it's a mistake to read the Longhouse and the idea of a Longhouse as sort of antagonistic towards women. That's a category error. That's not what this is. There are certain tendencies that women have, and their way of self-organizing and sort of handling disagreement and handling sort of tension within female-oriented or female-dominated communities that differs from male-dominated ones. They speak in different terms. They have different ways of communicating emotions. They have a different hierarchy of values. I think, I hate to sort of lean on social science research, because in other contexts I would dismiss that. But in this case, we have both the social science research and our own very plain intuition to tell us these things are true.
Yeah.
And this would be so trivially true to anyone who wasn't living in the last 10 years. Like, I don't think anyone, maybe 20 years, I don't know, would even bat an eye at the suggestion that there are certain like differences in the way that male-dominated and female-dominated communities function.
Yeah.
So what the Longhouse is a metonym not just for female-dominated communities, but a entire society and its major institutions that all fall under the particular norms that one might see in a female-dominated community. It is, one way I've described it in the past is gynocratic safetyism. That's a very ugly term. That
just call it matriarchy, but gynocratic safetyism.
Well, no. So matriarch, it's not matriarchy.
Oh.
We don't. That's the sort of. It's a bit pedantic to argue over that point, but it's not matriarchy. It's not rule by women, because a lot of men are in leadership positions in the Longhouse. In fact, it's probably most sort of it's
well, they're like, just hand maddens of the patriarchy.
Yes,
or matriarchy.
But
yeah.
but they are in many ways like in charge. They're not just taking orders from like female overlords.
Yeah. But they're following through on female typal hierarchy and power displacement, conflict, and conflict resolution.
Yes, correct. And so that's why I think matriarchy is wrong. Another easy way to think about this is like middle school female bullying behavior at scale. Okay, now mean girls at scale. That is one way to think about how our society is sort of directed and run. Do
you think Biden's going mean girl against Putin? Is that how the whole Ukraine thing is shaping out? That'd be a fascinating analysis.
You know, I haven't really spent too much time paying attention to.
I'm just thinking on global politics. If America became the world's mean girl.
But yes, I mean, in some way, it's extremely petty and sort of moralistic the way that, actually, yes, I would say yes. So maybe this is a way of thinking about like the difference between a realist foreign policy where Putin is operating according to a set of objectives that are totally rational and even predictable for the leader of a global power, and who feels threatened over his territory, versus our sort of, which I think is mostly the foreign policy position that Trump adopted, perhaps by accident, but nonetheless, like respecting the authority of these other leaders to sort of dictate the objectives and needs and wants of their people. Whereas the Biden gambit is to accuse Putin of sort of like lashing out, acting irrational and emotional. It's this question of respect and status, of looking at this conflict as a moralistic conflict rather than a sort of material conflict over the right of a great power to determine the conditions of its empire, of its boundaries. Maybe.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to derail you. So Longhouse is a concept of a kind of a female typal power structure and the way that it works out societally. And your critique, you just wrote an article that some people didn't like that an Anon would write such an article and be featured in such a place. That kind of just describes it. You lay out the idea. So there is the female typal way of organizing society. How is that brought in balance as a family man, as a married man? How is the female authority balanced by the male authority? That's what I'm really interested in the culture debate, in the gender debate, is going forward and figuring out how to depict male and female typal behaviors as co-processing rather than at war with each other. And marriage is ultimately the ground of the longhouse meeting the longboat. What's the opposite of the longhouse?
What is the opposite of the longhouse? Someone said maybe the mead hall. I heard that somewhere, but I don't know if that's true. What I would say about marriage is, we're in a sort of domestic private environment, and the rules that govern a domestic and private environment are different than the rules that should govern our public environments. The other thing I would say is, and what's worked in my marriage, though I'm not here to provide marriage advice, is that the two of us have our own sort of domain and role in the functioning of our household. In our case, it's sort of traditional, and my wife is better with the kids and, keeping the house clean and neat. And I take care of other stuff.
You go slay demons, bring back their hides and stuff like that.
Sure.
Right? Yeah.
But I mean, ultimately, we're, I'm not going to lie, like we are products of the late 20th century. You know, both of us, that's when we were born. That's where we came of age. That's where we took our cues. That's what we observed in our parents. And so there's probably more mixing of duties than might
Yeah.
be in traditional roles. Like my uncle, for example, who's a liberal, by the way, but my uncle never changed a diaper in his life. And he finds it amazing that I would change a diaper. He thinks that
Really?
is, yeah. I mean, um, so yeah, there's like, there are these
Yeah.
things I do, I suppose, that I don't know. Does
Yeah.
that make
Well,
emasculated because I changed diapers? I don't think so.
yeah.
But I think, yeah, I mean, we have very clear roles. We have, you know, look, I am in some sense a sort of fundamentalist about this sort of thing, about a gender. In some ways, I think that there are very clear differences, and we can talk about people on the margins, but on the
Yeah.
whole, men and women are different and have very different sort of preferences and needs. And one thing I see among like women my age, like millennials my age, is there's a lot of them who are unhappy because they thought that they could be satisfied basically taking on a male life. They could go be girl bosses and middle managers and try to make a lot of money and, you know, buy their own house. And very unfortunately, in my mind, a lot of them are single. They are reaching the age where they might have trouble starting families, assuming they come around to wanting that at some point. And these are otherwise very well put together people, very capable and competent people, but for a variety of reasons that I don't entirely blame them for, have rejected their nature to some degree. So yeah, that's my
But
sort of grade notion for the day.
okay,
But
just to tie it in a knot, what if their nature was to rule the longhouse? What if they got the world that they wanted by this longhouse, this female type
well, my
hierarchy?
position would be that the longhouse makes neither men nor women happy. Nobody's happy in this arrangement. Well, with the exception, like there are some maybe like natural school marm types, you know, these sort of Nurse Ratchet types who want to sort of sadistically rule over people. And that's certainly true. But I would think that most of these women were sold a bill of goods about what constitutes a good and satisfying life as a millennial woman entering this new century of possibility where you can have everything all at once, your cake and eat it too, your executive suite job and your kids at home. And that was a false promise. It was a very negligent thing to offer these women, and I think it grew out of some of the delusions of the feminist and women's lib movement of the 60s. My good friend Peachy Keenan, I'm going to plug her book here. She has a
There we
great
go.
book, Domestic Extremist, and she writes all about this. And I would encourage anybody to go read, well, pre-order Peachy's book. My
I
understanding
just
is
had her on a
starting
couple
out this
last
summer.
week, I think it was.
She's great. I
Yeah.
love her. And she speaks about these things in very clear and harsh but fair terms.
Yeah. Well, it's ultimately it's for the women to do that work for women. I like to bring that in because I'm interested in men being men and women being women and the advice that we can give to young men and the advice that young women can get from women too. But ultimately, I think for society to perpetuate, men and women have to get along, and there has to be
Absolutely.
discourse.
Totally. I don't disagree with that. But I don't think men can neglect their role in this. I think part of the reason this condition has arisen is because men have been negligent in their duty to rule and their duty to lead. And there's a certain kind of capitulation that has happened that I think leaves a vacuum
Okay.
for someone else to step in and direct and lead and control. And to hand over control to women or spiritual women, to these longhouse
sensitivity readers. Yeah.
Yes, is as much it's as much a problem for men to solve as it is for women, and it requires men reconstituting their belief in their own right to rule and to lead.
Okay, so from the poetic perspective, from what you're doing with the Passage Project, the Passage Prize, this is not a bunch of men leading. I don't know the gender makeup. There's a lot of an anon in this community, but it feels very male. There's a lot of male potency going on in what I've read of it.
Yeah.
So men reclaiming it's not just ruling, but it's also exploring. It's also the creative right, the right to, I guess, break down boundaries and test out new ideas and try their hand at things as well. That is then reflected by the praise of women. Like, women get to be the judge, so you got a bunch of judges in the Passage Prize, but ultimately women judge culture. Women kind of rule by taste. Yes. If you look at Boroughbirds, right, it's the female that shaped the male. The creative male is usually shaped by the female, and so there's this co-evolution that's going on.
Yes, absolutely. Men's monopoly on violence is leavened by women's monopoly on dictating status, sexual status in particular. Yeah. That's one way of thinking about it, and that's women's great power, I think, and. Something that is perfectly good and healthy. One thing I'll say is that with Passage, I was actually sort of surprised how many women entries we got, and I would guess, I can't say for sure, because like you said, some of them are anon, though I know in some cases whether they're men or women. I would say in that book, maybe 15% of the entries are women.
Great.
It could be as high as 20.
Yeah.
Some of the visual art, some of the very good visual art. We got a couple of incredible stories, short stories from women. I don't think any of the essays were from women. And we got some good poems from women, but especially in the short story and visual art category, we got a lot of great entries from women.
No, yeah, and, women know a good drama and a good look.
Yeah, certainly. And I don't think it's wise to exclude women from this particular project. I think there is absolutely good reason to exclude women from other things that men might be doing together.
Like what, golf, ski?
I mean, golf. Yeah. I mean, golf is sort of like, the most sort of denatured and threadbare version of like the male hunting party or something. But yeah, I mean, all male spaces are good, I think that's very healthy, and we should encourage that. We should encourage men to be in places where they can be free from the seductive gaze of women and their sort of, corrupting power over our thoughts and everything else. I mean, why not? That seems so odd. And again, it's like, wow, this would be so obvious that it wouldn't even justify like articulating out loud that men should have their own spaces in the world. Of course they should. So yeah, I think they should, although I will say, again, I don't think this is the appropriate place for that. I think women should be invited into this effort to reconstitute the culture and reimagine the culture.
So what's the future of the Passage? I keep on wanting to call it project, but what's it called?
It is a project.
Okay, Passage Project.
I started a company called Passage Publishing.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's a publishing house. We're going to have a full...
roster. When am I getting my unqualified reservations, dude?
Okay, we got them in the warehouse today. I apologize.
Yes.
I blame Canada. There are reasons. There are logistical.
Trudeau.
Yeah, there's supply chain stuff. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
No, no,
Okay.
those are coming any day now.
Great.
I wish we had those a week ago. We don't. But they're here. Um, so what do we have? We have Passage Prize. This is just one element of what we're doing. Passage Prize is meant to find and cultivate new talent, and then also sort of capture existing talent that may feel constrained by the prevailing culture and bring them over. Maybe they have things to say that they can't say over there. We want to bring them over here,
Yeah.
and we want to allow that talent to flourish. And so that's the sort of double objective of Passage Prize. That's going to be an annual thing. Then this current one will be announcing the winners in the coming days, and we'll be making a new book, and that will be coming out late spring, early summer, although these things always take longer than I hope. So let's just say summer. And then in conjunction with that, what we're also doing is publishing uh, books of various writers in our space. The first one we did was Unqualified Reservations, which was Curtis Yarvin's blog, famous, neo-reactionary blog from the mid
One might
2000s.
even call it seminal.
Seminal, yeah. And so this was really a proof of concept. Like, could we pull this off? The idea was to take pre-existing internet writing and turn it into physical print form. And we've done what I think are some really like sort of creative and innovative things with design and editing and form in order to pull that off. We're gonna do that project again with Steve Saylor's corpus of online writing. I haven't made the official announcement. This is an announcement, but I'll be making an official announcement at some point soon. We're gonna be taking the best of Steve Saylor and turning that into a book, and then we want to also be publishing new work. Okay, work that has never been published before, online or elsewhere, and stand up a frontless catalog. It's going to include people like Zero HP Lovecraft, others in our space, broadly speaking. We are standing up our own distribution so that we can get these books into bookstores and libraries. And so we're not just resigned to this sort of online self-publishing on-demand ghetto.
Yeah.
We are going to create a fully viable and functional publishing house. And I want to just say, this is my one shill for the day is, I've said this on previous podcasts, I'm going to keep saying this. We are currently in the fundraising round. So any people out there got some money to spend, we are going to be closing in about a month. But I want to invite people who may be listening to this. If you're looking to invest in culture, here's one way of doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. The one artifact that I have, and I'm eagerly awaiting Unqualified Reservation. It's a beautiful. You guys have put tons of work into it. It really shines. So it's just great to have in my house. This might be a problematic question, but you said our space, people in our space. Maybe you don't want to define that. Maybe it's not maybe it's just a platform, but there are contours to it. Maybe you don't need to discuss that, but I'm just curious. What is that space? Because I feel like I've been walking through this space for a while.
Yeah. There's a lot of different ways of thinking about this, and I use that as shorthand for what is basically a online social graph where there's a cluster of maybe 100,000 people, more perhaps, and then like there's concentric circles. So outside of that, there's another 100,000 people for which there's some overlap of those social graph networks. So I'm talking about like this densely populated region of the social network. Okay. And who is in that densely populated region are people who are maybe on the dissident right, so-called, people who are maybe sort of on the outskirts of what might have once been called the intellectual dark web. people who are, for a variety of reasons, finding themselves entertaining questions, ideas, perspectives that are outside the quote unquote Overton window. And we might call the Overton window are those things that can be published in the New York Times without eliciting the backlash of the staff of the New York Times and like threatening a mutiny. Anything that falls in that category of idea or perspective, we might call outside the Overton window. That's
And
not a formal definition. I'm just, yeah.
yeah, it's again. I think you're wise, and that's why I kind of stunted my own question. We're talking about something that's in relief. We're talking about something that's a cameo that just kind of has to appear, that just stands out on its own merits. In the first Passage Prize volume, what's something that just blew you away, or something that stopped you in your tracks?
There were quite a few things. There was the original artwork that won both first and second place prize. And I had no idea what I might expect to see when I announced this project. These were both of exceptionally high quality and were sort of just very aesthetically interesting and beyond anything I'd really like seen before. They were operating in a kind of like new artistic idiom. Now, they're definitely like the first one for sure is informed by an Italian painter, Di Chirico. There's no doubt about that. There are a lot of similarities in the composition of that art, but it was doing something totally new in a way that was totally unexpected. We also got a couple of short stories that I thought were just really tremendous. One was about artificial wombs, and it won the Editor's Prize. And I thought
that one, yeah.
This story, when I first read it, just kind of blew me away, not just in terms of like the ideas, but the sort of competency of it. It's called Does It Make a Sound? And
Oh wow.
I wasn't sure if what it reflected to me was that there are like real writers who are trafficking. Like I didn't know who this person was. It was in a non-account. It was in a non-name, but not even in a non-name that was attached to like a Twitter personality or anything. Like I have no idea who this person is, but it's someone who's like obviously very talented and has like well-honed craft. And so that was really heartening to see. The first place fiction. Georgia Buddha was just this like really incredible short story. This kind of it was this in some ways sort of old-fashioned Southern Gothic meandering short story, a very simple story, a prodigal son story. This guy goes to sort of wrest his son back from this hippie commune that his eldest son has moved to this hippie commune, and the dad goes and like tries to rescue him. But what's so great about the story was how nuanced it was, and how like it didn't treat these characters as sort of like stock figures acting out some like trite political, soap opera, where there was just this very like obvious good guy, bad guy dynamic. And there was just some like commie lib kid who's, facing the wrath of his, trad, strong father or something, where it's just very obvious. There was just a lot of nuance and interesting details about this character that made them three-dimensional in a way that you want to see these stories be told. And it made the story very human and specific and precise, but also captured this sort of archetypal narrative journey. So okay, I could go on and on about like everything in this book, but there was just tons of really good stuff. We have, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 80 contributors all told in this book.
It's
And
huge.
I could say something good about all of them. Yeah, it is. It's huge.
Beautiful piece of work.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah. There's some really interesting, like sort of experimental essay writing that's really good and really sort of blew me away. It's like somewhere on the cusp of poetry, like sort of prose poetry and essay writing. And then it's also really funny in my view. Okay, we have this like Weehan poem, Weehan, the Twitter character, work hard, study differential calculus, 18-hour. Okay. If you don't know, that's fine. But so there's like some inside jokes, that we're sort of delivering to our audience. But on the whole, I was really very, very pleasantly surprised with the high quality of content.
What would it entail to do another print run? Because it's almost like tragic that we're not shilling this work. You've sold out. Like so anybody coming across that, like.
So I've actually gotten dozens of emails since we sold out. People asking like if we can print another one. Will there be another print one? I am not going to print another one. Wow. I want to keep this.
Wow.
It's sort of scarcity.
Like this is the real life NFT.
Important. Well, sort of. So, I asked people to spend $400 on the hardcover version. And part of the bargain is that they were buying something unique. And that in addition to helping to fund this project going forward, they're also getting this rare and scarce cultural artifact, like you said. And the more we print of these things, the more that value is diluted. And I feel like I owe it to those people who really, I feel like, took a leap of faith to spend $400 on this book.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an amateur anthology from a bunch of Twitter anons being sold by a guy whose face does not exist, who is known by a Twitter handle. And I'm asking them to send me $400 with their credit card over some website that I built in like 3 days, and so it's like they're taking a leap of faith. They did something I think is important, and I want to respect what they bought, and part of that is not diluting this product. So they're out there. I mean, there's 500 of them. If people really want them, I bet you could find someone to sell it to you in a secondary market. But I think there's something special about this. Maybe it'll have. Again, I hate getting too grandiose about it, but who knows? Maybe there will have some historical value or something, or at least it's a representation of a moment in time. And a particular place in time.
Yeah, I would hope that perhaps someday some of the authors would do audio versions of this, because even Yarvin, was it Yarvin or Yarvin knockoff? Mencius Moldbugian? I guess.
Moldbugman?
Moldbugman?
Mencius Moldbugman is not Curtis Yarvin. He is, however, the judge for the fiction judge for Passage Prize 2.
Okay.
It's easy. I can see how you might get these people.
Well, his introduction was very Yarvinite, and the way that he dictated his terms of like, we're gonna take the whole project if there aren't 5 good poems, and here's how to read a poem. It was very Yarvinian.
Okay, sorry, I misspoke. Curtis Yarvin, Mencius Moldbug, is the poetry judge for the copy that you have that is currently in existence. This next one that we have not printed yet or announced winners for yet, the fiction judge, his name is Mencius Moldbugman. Okay.
All right. Okay, so I want to reiterate that maybe an audio version would be very well received and not dilute the product, but also kind of last question. It's getting late for both of us.
Yeah.
Big topic, but anon. I wanted to bring this up with you because Jordan Peterson kind of did a screed about anonship. And I'm just wondering, what is the significance of being anon? I know we can talk about keeping yourself safe, your family safe, keeping yourself out of it, but there's also a mimetic value to that. And a lot of the submissions to the Passage Prize Volume 1 are anon, and the community you even described as a bunch of anons. I'm wondering if you have any, again, a totally general question.
Yeah.
Why is that important? What is the value of that? What are the pitfalls of that?
Yeah, this is such a big question, and so I have a lot of thoughts on anon and the value and relative benefits and costs of being an anon. First of all, I think Jordan Peterson's wrong, and obviously wrong, and I think his personal animus towards anon has to do with maybe some distasteful experiences he's had, with people calling him whatever names or calling his daughter names, and that's just part of the terrain. I'm sorry, like I would tell Jordan, go clean your room, deal with it. Okay, this is part of being online, and being a public figure online is dealing with sometimes very grotesque and awful things being said to you by people on the internet. Okay, grow up. Now, more importantly, what is the value of anon? So again, one of my starting places is what are we trying to accomplish? Well, we're stuck. We need ideas and perspectives that are going to break through this sort of stuck condition. Where those perspectives are going to come from is outside this Overton window. We are dealing in the sort of frontier of ideas. There's lots of danger there. There's lots of opportunity if you're someone who's free thinking and not guarded about what sorts of ideas you'll entertain and then speak about, that you might say something that could have potential bad long-term consequences on your employability, for example. Yeah. And we don't want that. We want people to be able to explore all of these ideas, and the most prudent way to do that is by being anon. You just simply cannot, even if you're like an iconoclastic thinker, and I can think of many people who use a real name who demonstrate great courage in their willingness to say difficult things. But even then, and it's maybe different for each of those people, there are things they won't say because they don't want to have their name attached to that particular idea. Mm-hmm. I would hazard that that's true for 99.99%.
And not all of those ideas are destructive.
No, they're not all destructive. Certainly not. Or they're not all destructive. Some of them may be destructive and bad, but we need to be able to articulate them and hash them out in order to make that determination. And the only way to hash them out is through this sort of discourse, through this negotiation of ideas. Okay, so that's one reason why being anon is valuable and important. There's also this thing that you're alluding to where there's a certain kind of value in how ideas are received and perceived, because there's the absence of ulterior personal motive or ego that might be influencing why a person makes a particular argument or says something in a particular way. Now, I think that has maybe been corrupted some by the fact that anons, and I would include myself in this, actually do have something at stake. Yeah, it's not like it's a purely
well, once you get community, once you get big enough, like cat turd, levels of infamy, you're actually generating, you actually become another person. The anon becomes a person.
Like, I'm not going to be coy about it. Like, I'm selling books. People have podcasts. Okay, there are like reasons why that particular sort of function of anonymity gets corrupted at some point, when the anonymous figure, where the pseudonym sort of just takes the place of a public identity in some cases. Okay, so but there's now the third component, I would say, is, and this is one I don't see get talked about often, but in the digital world, we are tied to our history of beliefs and statements and behaviors and activities and the pictures we took and posted on Facebook and Instagram. And when we were in high school, we believed and said this thing. And we were in college, we believed and said this thing. And here we are with this picture of us. And there's no there's no self-authorship of identity that is sort of in flux and capable of alteration at different stages of life, as there were maybe in previous eras and generations. And I think that's regrettable. I think like high school and college kids should be allowed at some point to sort of rewrite themselves, to sort of reconstruct their identity. And this isn't just like I was a goth kid and now I'm like an accountant, like some straight edge accountant or something. It's more fundamental than that. There's something that's lost in the inability to sort of reconstitute your history. There's a lack of self authorship.
It's a world without cars. There's no way to escape.
Yeah,
the longhouse.
That's right. There's no way. There's no getting out. And it can be very traumatic to do so. And breaking with previous commitments becomes very difficult in a way that I think was not. So like there might be a natural evolution to how people's ideologies are formed and evolve over time. If I'm a college kid who sort of vocally and aggressively and even in a mean-spirited way commits myself to like communism or something, and I make enemies and like treat people poorly because of this, I'm committed.
Torch a Fed building or something.
Well, yeah, I mean, in that way, in that real sense. But I just mean there's a real sort of psychological incentive to fully commit to that identity permanently, because the cost of tearing yourself away from it and rewriting that self, even with all of those artifacts in place and for anyone to see and to point to, because now you're a hypocrite or something, makes changing identities as you grow and evolve very, very difficult. So I think anonymity is very valuable, and why young people especially might gravitate towards anonymity is because of this sort of freedom of self-authorship. So then the cost, though, like what Curtis Yarvin has said before, is that when it comes to like discourse, when it comes to like debate, you're sort of playing tennis without a net. You don't have the same standards and rules that people who are, arguing as themselves. They
skin in the game.
Yeah, there's a certain rigor, but actually, I think that's wrong, or at least at a certain point it becomes wrong for the precise reason that like the pseudonym actually becomes an entity unto itself. Like I'm anonymous, but this character Lomez
pretty
is
consistent,
a perfectly adequate stand-in for who I am, and is just as real as like Tucker Carlson's performance as Tucker Carlson on his show. I would think there's like just as much distance between most public people and their public persona and their private persona as there is between my anon persona and my private persona. That gap closes as you sort of at a certain point. And so actually, and like, if I am careless with how I make arguments and treat people poorly and don't abide by a certain sort of ethic and code of behavior that is valued in my community, I will be ostracized in precisely the same way that someone who is engaging in the discourse under their real identity will be ostracized from their communities. And so I actually think we're not playing tennis without a net. We're playing maybe a slightly different game. It's a variation on tennis maybe, but there are rules and there are codes of conduct and there are boundary lines. And if you violate these
community policed,
and if you violate them, you suffer reputational consequences. And so, it's it's fuzzy. And I think the more time we spend in these digital environments, the less of a sort of distinction there will be, at least in this respect, in this regard, about anon people and who we call face bags.
Face bags. I'm a face bag. Is that what you call me behind my back? Face bag?
Face bag. A face fag. That's just what they're called, you know. That's just the name given.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that's
Did
what I
I
am.
violate? Speaking of violating, I didn't mean to violate a code of conduct.
I
That's
think,
just-
well, your audio glitched, and I think myself in the audience heard the bad word that you said.
it is what it is. That's just what they're called. I'm not going to shy away from the word.
As a counterpoint, I think that as the people grow up in the internet, I think that a novelistic understanding of the human being as a character that has an arc will become more evident, and that collapsing of people into their worst moments will be less tenable. I believe that, because everybody will eventually get their 2 minutes of hate, and then everybody will just kind of be desensitized.
So is that what we want, though? Do we want people to become inured to this process of, like, where there's almost like this this like hazing ritual that you have to go through, where society just like flogs you for some indiscretion, you know, and it's like almost totally arbitrary because these norms change like at any given time. So like a girl, like I'm thinking back to these kids who, one of them I think got like rejected from her school. She like gotten into school, and then a video surfaces of her at like a dance, singing along to a rap song.
Yeah.
In which she says the word in this totally innocuous way, that at the time in which she did it and when that video was first recorded would not have raised any alarms, would have meant nothing in that social circumstance. She was not violating any taboo. And maybe in her own mind, even by participating like in this rap like sing-along, was in fact demonstrating some like racial solidarity or something, but which 5 years later or whatever it was now caused to kick this girl out of school. So, you know, it's like totally arbitrary. Do we want that? Do we want people to suffer through these events? And
what I'm saying is that it might be the case that those events don't happen anymore because they don't really mean anything anymore, because people kind of understand that we have more of a digital online kind of understanding of people as developing, and culture as or cultural acts, speech acts, as context dependent. But there will always be people who assassinate character, right? So one part of the battle would be to constrain or disincentivize or mock relentlessly people who make their bones out of being character assassins without actually providing any sort of positive content. So I'm just saying there might be a developmental process where that hazing ritual isn't a hazing ritual anymore. Isn't really.
I would hope so, but I would ask then, why is that happening now? Like, it seems to me that any reasonable person would see an episode like that and would pay no mind at all to this person posting this video. It would be a total non-story. Why is it that in the case of this institution, I think it was the University of Tennessee, acted on it? And what is going to change such that the University of Tennessee and the people ruling the University of Tennessee no longer act on that? And then, because I think that would be an indication that we've maybe rescued ourselves from this particular like fever dream that we're in, this sort of mania, this over certain taboos and certain ideas, and I frankly do not see the other side of this. I keep hearing about it. I keep hearing people sort of thinking that this will just sort of go away, the end of wokeness, etc. I think actually what'll happen is this will just get sort of folded into our sort of default way of experiencing the world, and the mania will cease to look like a mania, but will nonetheless.
Yeah, I think part of what incentivizes the mania is the novelty and the endorphins, and that can be deadened by constant stimulus or just some sort of you grow out of certain modes of behavior. Yeah. A society can grow out of a puritanical way of treating itself. The Salem witch trials happened at a very particular time on a frontier, and Evergreen happened at a particular time at a particular frontier. These moral panics happen on frontiers, and there will be other moral panics. I'm just saying there might be a way that things change. And to go back to another point that you were saying about people changing and inserting into the internet this idea that people do change. I think that one of the principal reasons that I've spent so much time interviewing detransitioners is to really embed in people's minds that, especially young people, change.
Yeah.
People make big errors in their life. And what they gain out of those errors is tragedy and is pain and is wisdom and is flourishing also. Not that we need bullying to become strong people, but that hardship that we subject to ourselves, those mistakes that we mistake in our youth, provide this change, this novel transformation. And I don't bring that up to are you for or against the anon thing. I decided not to be anon myself for whatever reason, because I just didn't care anymore. But I do respect what you guys are doing. But
I think that's right, and I think this effort to quote unquote normalize change and dramatic change, despite the long sort of trail of digital artifacts that you leave behind for anybody who wants to reconstitute your past and who you were, is a noble thing to do, and I think it's a worthwhile thing to do. So I support that. I still fear, though, that on balance, the simpler thing to do, where the incentives are aligned, is to not change, is to double down and recommit yourself to whatever early belief that you grafted onto. I don't have any proof for this. It's just an intuition.
Huh. So just to clarify your point, is that some people will never change because the incentive structure is that you just get locked into what you believed in?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean they won't change at all. People change all the time and in various ways. But yes, I think people are locked into certain ways of being, thinking, and it becomes really hard to disentangle yourself from those beliefs when there is this digital trail following you around.
Yeah. And is part of what you're trying to do in culture is to provide a space for change.
Maybe.
Dangerous conversations. If you were in a DEI trainer, that's probably what you call it.
I actually haven't connected the dots on these two particular items at all before. Yeah. I don't know that I'm offering a place for change. I think
wiggle room, dilating the Overton window.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of want to disrupt all of this stuff. I mean, in some way, I want to just completely reconstruct how we think about our place in sort of the modern world and everything entailed by that. Yeah. And I want new stories in a new vocabulary, an aesthetic vocabulary, a new aesthetic idiom, so that people have something to sort of grab onto and guide them through this landscape. That one consequence of that might be finding and discovering new ways of dealing with this problem of the digital record that's following you around. Mm-hmm. But that's not something I'm intentionally seeking to do. It's something that might arise out of this project.
Yeah. So passage publishing. You guys, you're doing a series. You got a series that you're doing with archiving, exhuming internet,
Yes,
and then putting into publishing, and then calling in new submissions. And you say you're only going to do that a year, but you've once a year, but you're doing 2 within one calendar year.
So the Passage Prize is once a year. That's a separate thing. That's like this arts contest.
Okay.
This catalog of books that's separate from that. We're looking to print right now, just given our size, and realistically how much we can scale this operation. Probably 4 books for the next 12 months. And then in the 12 months after that, maybe try for 6. One thing we want to do is just very carefully curate our selections. Yeah. We don't want to just print anything that comes our way. We only want to print quality stuff. The way that publishing works right now is they just churn out literally millions of books, most of which don't sell at all. We've outsold high profile authors already with our limited offerings. And what they count on is just volume. So out of these millions of books, they're just going to sell enough of each one. And then you hit on, 4 or 5 big blockbusters, and that makes your year. Yeah. What we don't have the luxury to do that. We have to be very careful about what we publish, and we're trying to cultivate an aesthetic. We're trying to cultivate a particular disposition. Okay, not ideology. It's not a political directive. Those things are coming along for the ride. Okay, but. This is a disposition. It's more fundamental than that other stuff. And so we want to cultivate that. We have a very particular type of writing that we want to produce with this. And
I guess you said possible spaces, which is a Twitter live stream kind of thing. I'm curious, and maybe later on down the road, you guys will venture into audio AV stuff and stuff. Is that on the venue? That's my domain at this point.
That's definitely on the horizon. I'd love to do that. It may be that when we first start this AI tech that can just read books for you becomes sophisticated enough that that's one way of turning our books into audio format. We might, at some point, if we can, I'd love to hire readers, like professional readers, to do this. I kind of don't like the idea of AI, frankly. I like human craft. I like handcrafted things. Yeah. And I'm, as a consumer, willing to pay a premium for handcrafted things that are durable, things that have a human touch. And so I'd much prefer, if we're going to get into the business of audiobooks, like we hire a professional voice actor. If that costs a little more, so be it. So actually, as I say this out loud, forget the AI, reading the books. That's off the table. I'm not doing it. I should have never said that.
I do have to say, Skeptical Waves, he's a YouTuber, and he's uploaded... He's used the Amazon's voice tech and published most of Yarvin's stuff, and the amount of sarcasm and irony that gets through, that's communicated by that Amazon AI is fabulous. It's unintentional, I'm sure.
Yeah, he uploaded my Longhouse essay.
Oh yeah, okay, I did. I think I saw that. Yeah,
and I noticed that the AI referred to me as Lomez. Like some kind of like French variation.
Is that a cheese or a beer? What do you think that is?
Yeah, Lomez. So I'm gonna be going by Lomez.
Or shampoo, maybe.
Right.
Well, Lomez, thank you so much for your evening. I hope to have you back on again, maybe in discussion with other folks in your space, as you call it. Fabulous work that you're doing, and it was great to get a chance to not duke it out with you, but rap with you for the evening.
Yeah, no, it was super fun. My requisite apologies for my meandering answers to some of your questions, but this was great, man. Yeah, I appreciate it.